Hello, everyone. My name is Alvin Huang, and I'm the Director of Graduate Architecture at USC. And I want to welcome you guys tonight to a very special event we're having tonight with one of our alumnus returning to speak about her work, Behnaz Farahi. Behnaz is a graduate of USC and one of my former students. I actually had her as a first year student, or first year graduate student in 2012, and then she interned for me afterwards in my practice, synthesis, design, and architecture. And then I was her thesis advisor for her final thesis project. And then she also worked for me again after graduating before going off to do her PhD at the USC School of Cinematic Arts. And since then, I've been able to maintain contact with her. We become close friends, and she's a fantastic, fantastic designer. I'm really, really excited to have her here. Behnaz is a designer, creative technologist, and critical maker. Trained as an architect, she explores how to foster an empathetic relationship between the human body and the space around it through the implement. She specializes in computational design, interactive technologies, additive manufacturing, and digital fabrication technologies. Behnaz is from Iran, did her undergraduate studies in Iran, did her Master's of Architecture here at the USC School of Architecture, completed her PhD in Cinematic Arts at IMAP, the Interactive Media Arts and Practices program, and is now an assistant professor at Cal State Long Beach, and also has her private practice, Behnaz Farahi, where she's working with people like, sorry, that's not who she's worked with. That's actually the several awards she's won, including the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum Digital Design Award, Fast Company Innovation by Design, Linda Tischler Award, a World Technology Award, and numerous other awards. Behnaz is a fantastic designer, an amazing computational specialist, but I think more than anything, what has been a real pleasure to see develop is her ability to turn computational design into a critical medium for investigating pertinent social issues, in particular issues of gender identity and social interaction. And so with that said, I'd like to welcome Behnaz Farahi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Alvin, for the great introduction. I really am humbled. It's a great honor to be here. I am going to share my screen. Please let me know when you can see my screen.
You're good.
Perfect, thank you. So it's a great honor to be here. Thank you for the invite. USC feels like home for me, as Alvin mentioned. I have been in USC for quite some time now. I studied in Iran. I started studying in Iran in architecture, and then I moved to US to study my Master of Architecture in USC in 2011. And then after that, I did my PhD in cinema school again at USC between 2013 to 2020. And then currently I'm assistant professor of human experience design interaction at Cal State Long Beach. With that, I would like today to talk about my practice, the type of work that I have produced in the last few years, ranging from the scale of wearables to architectural scale. As someone who's been fascinated about tactility, texture, and movements of materials, I've been wondering how these computational systems could be embedded into the substrate of matter, as though materials become machines and machines become materials. What I am specifically interested is a new kind of machines, an emotive machine, or perhaps emotive matter. And what I mean by emotive matter is development of material systems that they can change shape and respond to larger psychosocial issues such as human emotion, bodily perception, or social interaction. So I want to walk you through this journey of my practice. I'm inspired by nature, not only in terms of its complexity, in terms of forms, morphology, but also in terms of its intelligence and behavior in responding to both internal as well as external stimuli. I'm really interested to see how materials of the environments could become similarly intelligent in responding to their environments. And how could we develop systems that they're active, that they're dynamic, that they're reconfigurable and respond to users in real time. For that, during the last 10, 11 years, I've been exploring the production of systems and prototypes that changes the scales from an intimate scale of the wearables and fashion items to all the way to architectural scales and the world of interactive installations. In my design practice, I'm really interested to explore these soft systems, intuitive, interactive systems that changes engagement of the people in a three-dimensional space. For instance, I made series of walls and ceiling installation that responds to activities of the peoples underneath the ceiling. But these ideas didn't just stay in the world of architecture. Although I have trained as an architect, I soon was very interested to see how these technological devices could populate around the human body in order to address different types of questions, such as human enhancement or perception, or critical issues such as psychosocial issues such as gender. In that, I started doing series of 3D printed items, augmented with physical computing, such as Arduinos and sensors, that really started to question what is the boundaries of our biological body. For instance, in this piece, if you can control the helmet with the power of your mind using EEG technology, could you say that that object is part of your body? So during my time at USC, especially while also after my architecture, when I was in cinema school, I have collaborated with Mobile and Environmental Media Lab directed by Scott Fisher. And I have produced this ceiling installation, which actually I believe still exists in cinema school, where the intention was to see how the form of the environments could reciprocally change based on interaction with the activities of the people underneath the ceiling. So there's a Kinect motion capture camera that tracks the movements of the people underneath the ceiling, and the physical form of the environments could change accordingly. I want to walk you through some of the research or underlying research that I do to do this type of work. Part of my research is about developments of new material systems using computational systems. In that, I look at a variety of computational and algorithmic design tools for generating novel innovative materials using a variety of digital fabrication technologies, including 3D printing and robotic fabrication. Some of these prototypes that you're seeing right now is printed using multi-material advanced 3D printing, in which the material properties changes from soft to hard in order to provide certain dynamic behavior. So the question is how we use computational system for generating certain material properties that changes its properties across the surface in order to fulfill a certain dynamic behaviors. I also use a variety of actuation systems, including smart materials, pneumatic systems, as well as conventional motor systems such as servos and motors in order to activate these material substrates. Specifically, I'm inspired by the skin systems, such as the scales, feathers, and hair. And I have developed a series of projects that try to understand the principles behind these systems. How could we develop materials that changes their density, their forms and their properties similar to natural systems? And in that, I have part of my practice is really developing series of prototypes and study their material behaviors. And a lot of these research could benefit from advanced multi-material 3D printing, but some of these technologies are very expensive and not accessible. So part of my research is also looking at material geometries versus material properties, meaning that if you don't have access to a very advanced 3D printing technology, how could we use a cheap material, accessible material, but yet provide dynamic behaviors? Interestingly, during one of the research that I was doing, I realized that if you 3D print using SLA 3D printing, using materials which is very, very fragile, but you actually print it in a form of a spiral, interestingly, the global behavior is going to be very flexible. So this type of work shows that material geometries could actually affect the behavior of the materials. So for instance, in this case, we study different formations of spirals, how that can affect material behaviors, and then what type of formal expressions could be added into that logic of a spiral or coil. In general, and this type of study related to material exploration could be looking at morphology in terms of material properties as well as their geometrical feature, but I also look at behaviors in terms of sensing, encoding, and responding behavior of these materials. I have co-edited an issue of architectural design on 3D printed body architecture, in which we feature a series of architects that they're using their skill sets in the scale of the human body or for the human body, including groundbreaking work of people like Neri Oxman, Nervous Systems, Alvin Huang, and many others included in this book. To my mind, integrating interactive technologies into the environment shouldn't be just seen as a form of as an end itself, but it should be seen as a way to address larger questions. And those questions could be reflected on psychosocial issues such as, for instance, male gaze on the female body. In this case, this is Caress of the Gaze. Caress of the Gaze is a piece, 3D printed piece that is equipped with a very small facial tracking camera that can detect gender, age, and the gaze of the onlookers. So when the onlookers is looking at the body of the wearer, based on where it's looking, the garment moves. Sorry. So if you're the wearer, you know which part of your body is being looked at, and when if you're an onlooker, you know that your action has been notified. So this potentially really changed the social interaction. I would argue that when materials like this are embedded with computational systems, they could actually inform our social interaction, and that is something that I'm really interested to explore further. This project was very interesting because it's got a lot of extensive, really, attention from various media, and that was sort of out of my control. And at that moment, I realized that I touched upon something that it was very sensitive, and this is the notion of male gaze on the female body. Obviously, so many people loving it, so many people didn't like it necessarily, but it creates a lot of conversation, and I thought that that was very interesting for me to observe. I see the role of designer to ask questions and provoke conversation. Especially on topics that has so much sort of historical baggage in many different fields. The other part of my work looks at various types of sensor technologies. I look at ways that we could capture, detect information from physiological responses of the human body or users. In that, I'm also very inspired by the work of Rose Pickard's on affective computing, on ways that computation or computational systems is able to recognize, interpret, or simulate human emotions through measuring physiological responses of human body. I've been looking at a variety of these sensors through facial tracking, gaze tracking, expression trackings. There is just so much information in our bodies that could be tracked and measured for being able to have access to emotional states of the users. I've been thinking about notion of affect or emotion for so long, for the last few years. And I think what is really fascinating for me is that could environments, could architecture, or could fashion, could the materials of our environments being able to detect emotion? What is really fascinating is that a lot of animals, including mice, cats, and dogs, they're expressing their emotional states by bristling their fur. Could our garments change its shape like a second skin and sort of respond to its emotional states of its surrounding environment? So this is Opal. Opal is a soft robotic garment that is equipped with series of pneumatic devices and electronics that allow the wearable to become almost like a second skin. So it tracks the emotion of the people around, and based on what type of emotions they're expressing, it changes its form and behavior. The production of this piece consists of the study of the human body curvature analysis and translating that to a sheet of acrylic, laser cut acrylic, where the density and the height of each of the fiber optics were specified. And through the very sort of labor-intensive process, all these 50,000 fiber optics with different heights were embedded inside this sheet. And after that, the entire setup was placed in the bath of silicon, liquid silicon. And after 48 hours, the piece was ready to be peeled. And this procedure, it felt like almost like incision of implanting hair. And it was a very interesting custom-made process that it was very unique for this project. Here is where we are basically peeling off this second skin out of its bath. And here is the short video showing the piece. within the same line of thinking about the notion of affect and emotion and the word of affective computing, I've been approached by Adidas to design an interactive display case for their concept shoe. Obviously, for me, the question was, how could we create an emotional experience for people that they're experiencing this piece and create a very engaging emotional bond between them? How could we create something that if we know what kind of emotions they're expressing through their facial expression, how could we develop a new type of experience that leverage a deeper connection with people? So on this piece, as you can see, it's a display case that inside there is a concept shoe. I wasn't able to show the actual shoe, but we just placed a shoe inside so you can see. But it has a camera that it can not only detect facial expressions, but we could also train the system to know specific users. So the question was, how do we develop an engaging emotional experience for the user to experience this piece? The piece was inspired by a soccer ball. So it was consist of series of pentagon and hexagons, and an array of acrylic rods were mounted around the surface. Each piece was robotically milled, and it was modular, so we could assemble the entire piece with series of screws and nuts that come together in this specific format. And then from inside each of these components were equipped with an array of LEDs, so it could illuminate from inside out. And inside the piece, there was a series of components, including the brain of the system, the Raspberry Pi and few microcontrollers, the motor that it was allowing the shoe to rotate around, as well as a camera that it was mounted on top of the piece, and it was able to see the customers or the users' activities. This is the view of the piece. And in terms of the interaction design for this piece, the question that we were asking was, how could we develop a character, almost give this object a character as though it's alive? How could we give it like a character that it's happy or excited, or it's dreaming if nobody is around the piece? So the idea was really to develop sort of interaction design as a character or persona for this piece. So if it recognizes a face, it wakes up. And if it recognizes that you're smiling or you're happy, the piece inside, the shoe inside, start to rotate. The lighting patterns around the object start to blinks as though this piece is also excited to see you. One of the things that was fascinating about this piece went to Germany, to their main headquarters of Adidas. One of the things was fascinating was when multiple people were around the piece, the camera were detecting obviously the faces, and the shoe inside start to rotate around as though it wants to get the attention of everyone. So that really creates sort of a very playful experience for the users to really get engaged with this piece. For me personally, what was really interesting was also this sort of projection of what people were reading into this interaction, as though they were giving it a character, or they were thinking that, oh, this person, this piece right now is curious. So the interaction between the users and the piece was something that it was really interesting to watch between the people and the piece. And one of the and at the same time that this project is finished, I was approached by Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago to produce a piece for an exhibition called Wire to Bear. This piece is actually owned by the museum, called Iridescence. Iridescence, I'm going to walk you through the process of it, and then I'll show the final video. Iridescence is an emotive color that is equipped with a facial tracking camera and 250 moving quills. It's inspired by hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are amazing creatures because they can change the color of their skin or their feathers from dark green to pink and magenta. So the question was, how could we produce similar materials that changes colors and textures and shape in real time, in interaction to the people around. This project has a very interesting journey, and this video that you're seeing in the background is capturing some of that interesting journey. We decided to custom made these actuators. These are electromechanical actuators that we decided to build in-house. This because it was 250 actuators, and this was for the show for the Science Museum that it was supposed to run every day from 9 a.m. to 5 or 6 p.m. on daily basis. The museum has about 1.5 million visitors per year. So for us, it was very important to make sure the system is modular, that we produce something that it's durable, it doesn't break, or if it does break, it's easy to install with taking the broken piece out and replace it with a new piece. So we decided to not use off-the-shelf product because there were a lot of components that it has a lot of gears and things can break down. And we decided to make a very simple mechanism, electromechanical mechanism, that it has one axis of rotation from one side to another. This decision, it sounded very simple, but it went through so many iterations to fine-tune the final design. The final design, as you can see in this video, it has many components, and each of these components were soldered one by one to come together. One of the interesting things about this project was every aspect of this project, from design, electrical, software, everything in this project was custom made. It was 200 actuators, 40 driver boards, 4 microcontrollers, 1 camera, all embedded inside this piece. I want to say a few things because when I moved to US, I had no idea as a woman I could do this type of works. I had no knowledge of this type of works. And the more I just do this type of projects, in every project I learn more. So it was really truly like a process of like also finding myself in every project. The piece has a camera that can see people location as well as their facial expressions. If it realizes that you're happy, it generates a very subtle ripples of movement. If it realizes that you're angry or you're frowning, it moves really fast as though it wants to repel you from getting closer. One of the intention conceptually of this piece was really engaging with the notion of sensory substitution. If you're blind or if your eye is closed, how could we sense the world through a different sensation? Could you sense just through hearing your wearable? What is the emotional states of the people around you? Or where are they standing next to you if your eyes are closed or if you're blind? So with that, I want to show the final video of this, and I won't talk over it. So not only you could sense the world around yourself through this type of smart wearables, but you could also express in a different way using this type of systems. For the last 2 years, I've been really fascinated by the notion of critical computation. In that, I'm really interested to see how computation could be used to address larger questions. To my mind, the role of the design is to ask questions and to provoke conversations. And in that, in 2021, I did a project, Can the Subaltern Speak? And I was inspired by Iranian historical masks. It's been said that these masks were developed during the Portuguese rule, and they were sort of a way as a protecting the wearer from the gaze of a slave master looking for attractive women. Obviously viewed from contemporary perspective, this could be seen as a way of protecting women from patriarchal colonial oppression. So I've been really fascinated to see, to look at this mask and constantly thinking about how these women experience the words if their face is completely covered with this mask. And obviously the design of these are just very fascinating, how you could cover the entire face except the eye, and the eye becomes this a very important component in communication. What have been missed in this communication was really fascinating for me, and how we could empower these women using computational systems to communicate with one another in a new way. So this, as you see, it's a final design of these masks, as it was inspired by this Iranian mask. But obviously, masks in general are really fascinating. It has a long history, from political mask to historical mask. Mask could take so many different angles and roles. As a designer, I've been really fascinated to see how we could look at the design of this mask and sort of repurpose them to give it a new twist using computational systems. When I look at the role of the eye in this mask, I've been questioning that how can we use the eye for communication? And I came across this very interesting incident in which Admiral Jeremiah Denton, during his captivity in Vietnam, he sent a message, torture, using his blinking, using Morse code. That was the moments in the project that I felt like, oh, this is really interesting. I'm really interested to sending or thinking about the notion of secret messages using Morse code and using eye blinking. And obviously sending messages and encoding messages is nothing new. It's been throughout history, but also in recent years, we can see that women, for instance, use coding words or code words to sort of ask for help against domestic abuse. But also in recent years, one interesting thing that I came across was Facebook AI Lab released these experiments in which the scientists, they were trying to have two bots communicate with one another. And these bots start to produce sort of language that it didn't make any sense linguistically. That's why scientists felt uncomfortable and stopped and intervened with these experiments. What was fascinating for me is that knowledge is power, and inability to understand that knowledge would unnerve those who wants to keep the authority. So this sort of three stories was really sort of underlying conceptual idea behind this project. In terms of the design process, this piece was mapped to the Langer lines of the human skin. Langer lines are the minimum tension line of the human skin, which are usually perpendicular to the muscles underneath. And the piece consists of 18 microcontrollers that they're located on these 3D printed landscapes of Langer lines of the human skin. Each actuators, which are very small, tiny electromechanical actuators, are holding a fake eyelash and gives the illusion that there are 18 eyes looking at the onlooker. And these are some of the behavior studies to see how we could synchronize different type of behaviors. The piece also, the mask has a very small sensor that can track the openness and closeness of the wearer's eye. So the wearer could control when the message could be sent to the other person. In terms of the programming of this piece, it was all based on using machine learning algorithm to control the behaviors of these messages and controlling the behaviors of these electromechanical actuators. So machine learning algorithm was trained based on the seminal article by feminist theorist Gayatri Spivak, Can the Subaltern Speak? So as you can see, none of these words does make any sense because these are not produced by a human, but they produce based on machine. I'm going to switch to the parts that it's really about Spivak and his article on Can the Subaltern Speak? So the whole training of this algorithm was to see how we could generate a new type of language if we can train the system, train the artificial intelligence system based on this seminal article, which asks, I mean, it's really fascinating article which asks the question of could the subaltern or the colonized ever be given voice in the light of oppression of the colonizer. So within these questions, this piece is asking that whether this helmet, this mask could be a tool for empowering these women to send messages. So each mask send message to the other mask using BLE protocol, and masks can communicate with one another, sending and receiving messages.
This project is inspired by the historical mask worn by the Vandari women from southern Iran. It's been said that these masks were developed during Portuguese colonial rule as a way of protecting the wearer from the gaze of a slave master looking for attractive women. While these Iranian masks cover most of the wearer's face except the eyes, I've been wondering how the eyes could be used as an expressive...
Sorry, this is, I'm sorry. Now, this is the final video. One of the aim of this project was really to sow anxiety within the patriarchal system by developing a new language that unnerves the patriarchal oppression and gives voice to these marginalized group. Within that context of critical computation, this last year in 2021, I was one of the co-chairs of Acadia conference. Acadia is Association for Computer-Aided Design and Architecture. In this conference, we organized a series of amazing talks and lectures to really question and interrogate ideas of critical thinking, emancipatory design, participatory design, and with series of really amazing talks and presentations where Alvin also won the Digital Practice Award. So these are all on YouTube, and I encourage you all to definitely check out the conference. The notion of gaze and the critical notion of the gaze has been really sort of interesting for me in the last few years. And currently, I'm working on a very exciting projects for a cutting-edge fashion designer for Milan Fashion Week coming up end of February in Milan, in Italy. So keep an eye on that. And then just a few more updates on my end. I'm also finishing a book on interactive futures, where we are addressing and featuring a series of theoretical as well as projects by some of the leading voices in the world of interactive design, from the scale of architecture to fashion and urban scales, really, which is supposed to come out in 2022. So again, that is coming up. I would like to finish this talk by saying that few things about my experience at USC. Obviously, I started from USC School of Architecture. I moved and I started collaborating with Professor Behnaz Farahi at USC Viterbi School of Engineering. I have learned a lot when I was at the School of Architecture from people and mentors like Alvin Huang, Manuel Delanda, and many others, really. But also, I was very fortunate to be able to tap into the wealth of USC campus in different departments, such as USC School of Cinematic Arts, where I worked with people from Mobile and Environmental Media Lab to Word Building Lab. There is just so much wealth in USC. And in recent years, I've been inspired and worked with feminist theorist at USC Art and Design, Rusky School of Art and Design, Amelia Jones, where her practice and her way of thinking really informed my critical design practice as well. So I don't know what I can say, but I can just say that it's been USC were just absolutely wonderful experience for me. And it really helped who I am today. And I'm very fortunate that being able to really sort of develop this sort of interdisciplinary way of thinking while I was at USC. And that was not possible without all the support I have received from mentors and friends and colleagues and the community at USC, really. With that, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hear your questions and comments.
All right, well, thank you, Behnaz. That was fantastic. Really, really amazing to see all of the work and the trajectory. I think one of the things that strikes me is that, when we first met and you first started at USC, you were straight from Iran. I mean, literally straight from Iran. Like you had arrived, I think, straight from the airport when we first met. How quickly you've actually turned into a California girl. Like now you're a surfer and a skateboarder and, living that LA life. And it's been great to have you at USC, and you've been a fantastic, alumnus as well. Like you've given back to the school, and your presence and has been an inspiration to many of our students. Because I think with our students, as you can imagine, it's nice to see somebody that's on the lecture series that's doing great work that actually was sitting in the same seat that you were in not too long ago. With that said, I would like to go ahead and start opening it up for questions. If you guys have any questions for Behnaz, please feel free to add them to the Q&A. I guess the first question here is from David Hung. Are you teaching or plan on teaching any classes at Cal State Long Beach?
Wait, I am teaching at Cal State Long Beach. Come find me. I'm teaching at the design department, human experience design interaction. It's a graduate program that we have. So I'm teaching there. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So the question from Jacob Tennant. So much of your work seems to hinge on visual detection of emotion from the face. This seems like an important part of human experience, right? That we can see and react to each other's nonverbal cues. But these days, much of our interactions are through masks. I'm curious, therefore, how you feel about them. Is there some nonchalance we've adopted towards not seeing each other's faces and emotions that might be problematic?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I mean, the fact that we are now covering half of our faces with masks most of the time, it's very fascinating. We are losing so much information. There's so much information we're missing out. Having said that, I also think that that we are experiencing the world. A lot of time, yes, it is sort of like facial expressions, and sometimes there are underlying informations that we can't capture through face. So I think there is limitation into sort of facial image-based tracking systems. So I actually look at also like EEG sensors that track your brain activity, or through different type of sensors that can read the underlying information. But I think a lot of times the limitations could also inform the next type of explorations. In my practice, I'm really interested to see that if we are covering the face, in case of, for instance, those Iranian women, how could we empower them? If there are information that is missing, how could we use that limitation for turning to an opportunity for design? And especially in the light of this pandemic, I think there's so many possibilities as we are covering the spaces to think about ways that we can express, or new type of way that we can express.
Another question from Hana Nagasaka. If we want to learn more about this and start conducting personal projects ourselves, where should we start?
So one of the stories I forgot to say, which is, this is a perfect place to say. I remember Alvin first semester that I was your students, very first students, I came up with this idea of this canopy that moves where people go. And I came to the idea, it has some other layers of information. It was very interesting conceptually. And then I brought the idea to the class. He said, oh, fantastic, great, just go build it. And I was like, what? Go build it? I don't know how to build things. And I realized that semester I spent so much time in the workshop building things. And you were like one of the figures that really pushed me to study materials, to study construction, to not just like have something on a piece of paper on a computer, but actually start to understand how things come together physically. And that is one of the underlying principles in my practice, that everything needs to be prototyped physically. And even if I don't know how, I should somehow figure it out. So I think if you don't know where to start, is let your idea come first, and then allow it to realize it, to see where you can start to build it. And for me, that process was a journey of finding my voice, really. Spending time in the workshop with big machinery that I had no idea that as a woman I can do, run large machines. It was something that I found my own voice and my own identity. So whatever it's intimidating, I think you have to overcome that. If it's coding, if it's using machinery, or if it's using any tools that you don't know, you just have to let those fears go and just kind of dive into it and try to see how you can prototype that in real life. So doing, learning through making and doing is the principle of this type of work.
Another question here from Lee Stone. Thank you for sharing your deep work. Are you writing software to assess gender for your project on the male gaze? Can you speak to how that has been with society moving away from the binary gender identities?
That's a fantastic question. I mean, it's so fascinating to think about the question of non-binary, especially when we're using computational system, which is at the end become very binary. Systems that will tell you if you're a male or a female, including in my piece, it's very problematic. I have worked with system that uses data sets to categorize us, to say, is this a male or female? But yet we know that we are trying to avoid this type of binary divisions. So working with this type of computational systems, it's very interesting to also poke them at where they're failing, including where they're trying to classify us based on pure representation. So in my current research, I'm a lot looking at these issues of how we could avoid binary classification of data, how we could account for diversities of voices, of diversities of identification. I think it's very challenging, and the reality is that in many cases, even in life, we are still, although we're saying LGBTQ, we still categorize people, we still put them in category. So I found this question very interesting. I don't know how we could overcome this form of classification. Is there any way that we could even one day not think about putting things in category? But at least we can move away from the sort of binary divisions of gender, and hopefully we can move away from that. I hope I answered that question. That was a really good question. I have to think more about it, I have to say.
I'm going to skip the next question because you kind of answered it previously in terms of advice for young designers discovering their own personal narrative. It's kind of a repeat of a previous question, but next question from Nicholas. I'm not going to try with the last name. I think that as designers, our education sometimes makes us shy away from getting into the granular details of products in terms of custom engineered components and the manufacturing processes. It is assuring to see that success can be achieved by being involved in those processes. Thank you. Okay, that's not really a question, but all right.
Yes. And no, I mean, I think it's so, I think that's so important, actually, that type of paying attention to the details of the product. And especially, like, a lot of time I feel that a lot of designers, they just give up on doing things themselves. They just think that design is something on a piece of paper, and they just have to send it to a fabricator and someone is going to build it. But actually, how you pay attention to all those details, how you resolve it on your own way and make custom-made products that address all the complexity of the unique situation that you're designing, I think is very crucial for me.
Big fan of your work. This from Dot Fan. Big fan of your work. Any examples of recent works of other designers that you found inspiring?
I mean, there's so many. The last, for some reason, the person who comes to my mind that I do appreciate his work is Rafael Lozano Hammer. And I just recently, maybe just because I listened to his talk just 2 days ago, and that was something that it was very inspiring to me. I mean, obviously, his other collaborator, Krzysztof Wodywsko, is very inspiring to me in terms of like thinking about ways that we could think about bringing voices of people or marginalized voices to the art practice. I think this is something that is very interesting to me. So that type of work is just inspiring to think
Yeah,
about the
Raphael,
social. Mhm.
yeah, Raphael was one of the keynotes at Acadia in Mexico City.
Absolutely, yeah. And then Christophe was this year in Acadia, and they actually collaborated with one another for one project. So it's very interesting that and their work is, you can see that their trajectory, they're similar, really kind of socially engaged practices, but really also embracing new technologies. I found that very, very interesting. So technology is used for addressing larger questions, and not just to fetishize technology.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's actually one of the things that I found most inspiring about your work, is that kind of, as it's matured, it's become more focused on less on the technology itself and more on its social impacts and its ability to participate in kind of cultural discourse.
Yeah, and I hope that I can really kind of elaborate more and more in the future. That's as a new spin in my practice, obviously in the last 2 years, but I really hope that I can take it further in that direction.
Question from David Hung. What is the driving force behind all of the work that you've accomplished?
That's a difficult one. I don't know. I don't know what is the driving force, but I know that it's just, there is some force. There's something there.
From Kelby Sandvik, the progression in our artificial intelligence understanding and technology has been criticized for a number of things, including the concern regarding creating machines that are too human-like. With your work in emotive machines and computing, how do you approach this type of criticism?
That's Kelby is one of my students. Great question. One of the things that I'm trying to avoid is not to become really human-like, but actually become non-human-like. And a lot of times when I make my wearables, let's say, smart, the wearables become almost like a second skin or some sort of living creatures on their own. So for me, I'm trying to really see that this is not from sort of human perspective, but allowing any objects, any materials around ourselves to be alive or lifelike. And my hope is that this would sort of create a sort of non-human centric approach in design, which is not all about like human-like, but other species-like.
One final question here from Doris Sung. Hi, Behnaz, thanks for your lecture. What would be your dream project? Would it be something at an architectural scale or larger?
Thanks, Doris. Big fan of your work, and great to see you here. Well, that's a great question. The dream project, I always, similar to every architect in this room, I want to build bigger. Although I once moved to fashion scales, but I also find extreme pleasure in changing the scales to go larger. My current projects that I'm working, it's a robotic installation for a fashion runway. My hope is to really move toward public installation and public art, and really bringing the sort of critical ideas in a larger urban scale. So we'll see if ever that transition could happen, but that's my sort of hope, to see that if I can really go once even bigger, more like an urban public installation that could be viewed by public.
Jeff Von Owen here. I loved your project in Alvin Studio. Behnaz, it was one of my first reviews as a guest juror at USC and made me excited to teach at USC. I am so proud of your innovative and bold creative career. My question is simple. When am I going to go surfing with you? And will Alvin join? I can answer the second part, which is no. I mean, I can watch, but...
But you gave up on trying.
Yeah.
Jeff, thank you so much for your kindness, and I appreciate that. And yes, let's go surfing. Definitely.
Well, as you can see, you've got a lot of admirers here at the School of Architecture, from your former faculty that are now fans. And it's really been a pleasure to watch you mature and the work mature, and everything develop into winning a Cooper Hewitt National Design Award. So being acknowledged at the kind of highest level. And not only did you, get a Cooper Hewitt National Design Award, I also know that you very recently became a U.S. citizen. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, Behnaz, and watching the progress and the progression has been fantastic. I guess I have one last question here, and I think you knew very early in your career, at least I knew very early in your career, that your interest in responsive environments was going to be a career-defining exploration. But what I didn't know at that time, and I don't think you did either, was that interest in responsive environments was actually an interest in kind of challenging the status quo in regards to social norms. And I think that's actually where this kind of idea of critical computation has really come into play, where we've had many conversations about this in the past, about how one of the issues with architecture, the discipline of architecture, and maybe even more so when it relates towards computational design and architecture, is the fact that the conversations tend to be extremely introverted, or let's say a bunch of geeks talking to a bunch of geeks about geek problems. And in this case, taking those technologies and the medium of design as something that's tackling issues that are pertinent to the wider world around us is something that you've taken on. When did that begin happening for you, and how do you see that progressing in the future? And what advice would you give to students looking at that? So I know we have students today from Lisa Little's thesis section here as well, which is actually titled Critical Computation. So we have a bunch of thesis students who are trying to take a position on this idea of critical computation as part of their thesis projects. So I guess I'm trying to fish for them for ways that you might be able to position this.
Yeah, that's great question, Alvin. So I'll try to remember things. That it was 2010 that I decided to move to US, and I started my architecture at 2011. And you're right that I came with this feeling that I knew that I'm interested in interactive design. I didn't know what I'm going to do. I was interested in responsive interactive systems. Having said that, even back then, I remember I was few people that I was inspired by their work. One of them was Christoph Wodivsko. And one of the work that he was doing at the time, or one of the proposals that he put that I was really intrigued by, was this monument, Philadelphia monument to light up the Philadelphia Tower based on people's data, including employments and not employments or education. So the residents of the city can read the lighting of their monument and immediately know the information that how the city is doing. I remember I was back in Iran, I was really inspired by Christoph's works, or the movies, like filmmakers like Andrei Tarkovsky. Like I was always interested in these other layers of concepts or ideas that make the work more than just the use, like just the use of computation or tools, but do something more. I wasn't very explicit. I had to discover that through this journey, that what is it that I really want to do. For me, I think the first few years of studying architecture, and then also during my PhD, it was just learning the techniques. So I think my advice would be it's a little discovery journey that you have to dig inside yourself to realize what is it that it makes you interested. Don't just do whatever other people, your peers are doing, but really try to find that thing that makes you excited about some role models, some mentors, someone that you think that is interesting to me, and find out what is that quality that makes that person to stand out. And I think for me, it was really going through these years to discover that, well, this type of political or psychological issues is the sort of interest in addressing the work. So it's this, it wasn't that it wasn't there and it just came about. I think it was there, but maybe hidden. And each of us have layers that they're hidden, and we have to discover them through the journey that we go through. So my advice is just try to go through that discovery journey and try to really dig inside to see what is it that makes you really interested in a topic, and how can you use computation to address that issue. Either it's ecological crisis versus social, economical crisis. Like, what is it that you're interested to address using these technologies and computational design?
Well, thank you once again, Behnaz. Real pleasure having you, and all the best.
Thank you so much, Alvin. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.